So I am going to be presenting today the recommendations from our think tank. And the first one that we had, the first discussion that was had, was on the museum personnel. And what I think is important is to think about what are the invisible barriers that make the museum sector. One more time. What are the invisible barriers that make the museum sector attractive or not as a place of work? What work needs to be done for recruitment and selection, personnel management, internal communication, and external positioning? These are the questions we started with. So in May and June of 2021, Gladys hosted some meetings with the think tank, as I mentioned, and the museums that you see present on the slide behind me. The experts in the think tank met on May 27th, and the co-reflection session with the museums was on June 18th with Tineke from Acteris, Tineke Holvoet from Acteris. Their advice was then translated into a series of questions. This method of combined advice did not really highlight enough the nuanced recommendations of the think tank. And so when I will publish these recommendations, you'll see that there's a form change between this first one and the following four. But this is so that you can really benefit from having a nuanced and really empathetic approach to these recommendations. Okay, so the first topic we went over was recruitment and selection. And the question at hand here is, do you only receive candidates from the same background as most of your personnel? And as I said, I think a lot of this goes back to the invisible barriers that a lot of people don't see. And this can be from the very beginning in your job description itself. So these suggestions are to make potential candidates see themselves in the role and to reassure them that they should apply. So the first thing we can do is to have phrasing in the job offer that encourages more people to participate. For example, this is a list of qualifications of our ideal candidate. If you are interested, we encourage you to apply. The second is to use inclusive language, which is a big one for me. Really am a big fan. Instead of saying something like chairman or chairwoman, we can always say chairperson. In French, it's a little more difficult sometimes. But for example, for my position, which is coordinatrice, would be my title. We have coordinatrice et coordinateur, the feminine, the female, woman, and man version of this title. And instead of using this kind of formulation, we can always say coordination, which is, instead of saying coordinators, we say coordination of a project. To go even further, museums can think about how they ask people to apply for their positions. Normally, we request for people to send in a CV and a letter of motivation, but there are actually a lot of different solutions that you could approach to this. So, for example, you can have a competency test put in place, especially for technical jobs. The one that I really like is to have a series of questions that you ask candidates instead of having them write a letter of motivation, which can be very intimidating. So for Open Museum, the questions that we asked were, how do you see yourself in the vision and mission of Open Museum? What is your experience developing an inclusion strategy? And how have you implemented inclusivity into your prior experience? For small museums, there's a recommendation I think that could be particularly interesting, which is that when you have a job opening, you make an interview day. Anyone who is interested in applying for your position can come in and do interviews directly with you. which is a lot less intimidating for people because these job applications can have a lot of unintentional discrimination when it comes to age or name, places of work, especially if you're from or you've worked in another country. Sometimes that experience is not valorized as much as it could be if you were there in person to actually defend your case. Finally, museums can always reach out to actrices to help with creating a diversity plan and figuring out what it is that they actually need in their institutions. Next, we can talk about some of the diffusion efforts. Do you always send your job applications or job offers to the same places? It's a small one, but it can actually make a really big difference. There are a lot of companies that exist for diverse topics, diverse target groups that you might be looking to reach out to. So, for example, here in Belgium, we have Job at Ubuntu, matchbelgium.com, Duo for a Job, Keep Dreaming. These are all networks that look to recruit people from underrepresented backgrounds. So it might be a great idea for you to put your job offer also on those sites. And then finally, do you always end up choosing the same profiles? This is a big one, because you can put these other steps in place, but this is the part that actually matters. You have to think about, why are you looking for the type of person you're looking for? You have this idea of an ideal candidate in your mind. Is that ideal actually necessary? Why have you decided that that's the type of person you need? You can approach these situations with a much more open mind, because varied experiences are interesting. They can offer you things that you didn't realize you could have that could be useful for your institution. And out-of-the-box profiles often offer a lot of soft skills as well. So if you have people with new perspectives coming into museums, first it's going to change your atmosphere, it's going to change your work atmosphere, and it's also going to give you a whole new way of understanding. It can give you a new way of understanding how your institution actually works or could work. And lastly, don't forget, it's the potential of a candidate that counts. Because for a lot of positions, you don't actually need to know all of the material beforehand. You can learn on the job. If someone is passionate about it but doesn't have exactly the skills you're looking for, don't discount passion, because people will be willing to learn. So let's move on to personnel management. We have some fighting dinosaurs for you. It's a very interesting conference. So as museums continue their path towards becoming more inclusive institutions, it may become apparent that internal management structures need updating. So the questions to ask: are the people in your museum included in your activities? This can look like the external people who work in your museum every day, the security staff, for example, or the people working in the museum cafe. Do you invite them to museum-wide events? Are they active in the functioning, in the meetings, for example, you have? Do you invite them in to learn about what the museum is doing? Or do you treat them as external people? Because if you're including them in the events, you can really create more of a team feeling. And that will also have an effect on how they interact with the publics that you have in your institution. So then this idea of team building is, of course, really important, because it's when we have personal interactions with people who have different backgrounds than we do that we can realize, okay, maybe we don't agree on X, Y, or Z, but A, B, and C all line up. And we have so much more that we actually connect on. And lastly, this is an important one for me, and this is the heart of inclusion work. The workers' perspectives, the people's perspectives from around the museum, whether it's the front desk or the people who are giving guided tours, the people doing security, people managing projects, they all have really interesting insights. And they need to be able to share those insights with the decision makers, if not be a decision maker themselves. So decision makers, if they're not creating a diverse environment, if they're not, I have to think about my words carefully here. Decision makers need to have time that they set aside specifically to listen to their employees and to get their feedback and to take that as very valuable advice. Because if you have someone who's at your front desk who's constantly interacting with every visitor that you have, but if you're in the back office, you're not there. You come out from time to time, you'll see a little bit, but what could be different at the front desk? How can you change that to make your museum more inclusive and more welcoming? It's just food for thought, like everything else is here today. Next, how are museum employees supported by the museum? It's one thing to hire someone from a new background, but it's another thing to ensure their safety at work. Safety, for example, from aggressive stereotypes or prejudices, which is fundamental for your mental health and happiness at work, and is a reason that a lot of people leave work environments. So you might be finding, okay, great, we've got this really good recruitment strategy. We keep finding people whose backgrounds are different from what we have, but they keep leaving. Why do they keep leaving? And it's part of the introspection. What's actually happening when they're here? How are they being treated? Is there problems that are happening that we haven't been seeing or paying attention to or giving enough credit to? This is, of course, particularly important for people who are in HR, human resources, so that this can be taken seriously. It's not just a few training sessions a year that are going to break down prejudices that have been building for decades. So, as people who want to have inclusive institutions, it's on you to learn about it. It's on you to go out and look for resources to inform yourself. It's for the HR staff to realize, okay, there are big issues that we have in society that each of our members, each of the people here feels. As a woman, sexism, as I already mentioned, is a big part of my existence, just in every day. And it's in small ways, and it's something that I've learned to live with. But if you're in HR, it's your job to make sure that I have a safe environment. So people even slightly harassing me is not okay, and that needs to be taken seriously. So this can look like reading books on topics. This can be watching movies, going to conferences. Shout out to the Open Museum Conference. This one. Also following people on social media, on Instagram, TikTok. TikTok's my favorite. You should see my TikTok. It is full of great activist videos. Woo! So this is the kind of stuff you can be doing in your everyday life just to learn a bit more, to have these new perspectives. Because it's not just a couple of conferences, a couple of training sessions that are going to help you deconstruct all of these problems. It's a lifelong journey. So then we have personnel management. How are employees reimbursed for their time? So what are their tasks, and is there space for growth? This one is more about having a healthy work environment for people, again, so that they want to stay at your institution. And one of the big problems that I've noticed and was talked about during our sessions are unpaid internships or underpaid internships, which I know is not necessarily the museum's choice. There's policy that is in place that for students who are doing internships at museums, they cannot be receiving any kind of payment for it. And that's why we advocate that museums advocate for policy change, because the work that the interns are doing is very valuable, and it's a lot of work. And for someone like me, I came here to Belgium, and I was going to university. I paid for it, and I spoke French as a second language, so it was really hard, a lot of headaches all of the time. I did 3 internships, and the entire time I was working as an English tutor. So I would have to balance out trying to understand my classes, going to my classes, then hours of trying to understand the content of my classes, going to an internship that's every other day. I did the Nocturne internship with Brussels Museums. And so every Thursday I was out going to different museums, and I had to try and make that balance happen. And I'm actually from a privileged background. I have a lot of support, but I was doing this on my own, and it was extremely difficult. And if we can make changes happen at this level of internships, there can be greater diversity in the museums, because this is a barrier to entry, these unpaid internships. A lot of people just cannot afford to spend this time in the museums. It's a personal topic for me. So when you budget your projects, it might be interesting to think about how to find money so you can do paid internships. Even if it's not for people who are going to school, there are a lot of other people who look for paid internships. So as I said, advocate for policy change so that we can have a more equitable foot when we step into this door of the museum world. Okay, and I'm just going to move forward a little bit here. The internal communication. The history of museums in Belgium is one that has a white, highly educated, and heteronormative work culture, which is normal. It's the mainstream of Belgian society. And this is the group of people who formed the museums here. Though there's been an evolution, it can be a challenge to break down barriers, as these are based on systems where people are traditionally unaware of their own biases or the biases of the people who came before them. And so this is how we have some of these structural problems. For example, a museum may communicate that it is anti-racist and anti-sexist, but not everybody on the team might be. There might be some people on the team who still need to be coming forward. And there's the personal issue, but there's also the structural issue. If your museum is only hiring people who fit certain backgrounds, that's something that needs to be looked at and changed, because it is the continuation of an issue. So what can we do to make the museums of tomorrow better places for more people? To do this, however, museum employees need to be informed on how to see these issues before they can analyze their institutions and its practices. Museum staff could therefore work on personal and structural progress to see how they can improve these. And again, shout out to the HR professionals who could be working on this. So this first question, what to do when people don't see a problem? When someone can't see a problem, they can't fix it. Therefore, it is important to have training sessions on these topics of unconscious bias and stereotype for all the employees and the boards of directors. The board of directors itself should welcome new voices of underrepresented perspectives. But it's not enough just to invite them. You have to be actively listening to what they have to say and be aware of the biases that they face in their lives. For example, as a woman, I'm often more frequently cut off than my men counterparts. It's just a little bit of everyday sexism. I will often be cut off, have someone else, for example, come in a minute later and say the exact same idea as me, and that's suddenly the good idea. So, pay attention to those small things. What do you do when your front and back staff don't communicate? By this I mean like the people who are actively working in the museum every day and the people who are in the back running the administrative side. One of the things that was suggested was that we have information meetings where everyone is informed of what's happening in the museum, what are the activities that are coming up, what are our planned areas to explore. This is just so everyone feels like they're on the same foot and they can present issues if they see them already to you. And also, if you have these meetings, you'll be having all of these people who can then talk about it to everyone else. Yeah, these are these great activities we're working on to be an inclusive and better institution. Come check us out. Next. Then how can you ensure that staff are actually receiving internal communications? And do the staff have a way of presenting concerns to their superiors? So museums reported that it's a challenge to keep everyone informed on their internal communications, on new things that are happening in the museum. As mentioned, we can do these information sessions, but also there could be some time spent thinking about how internal communications are done. Not everyone is really active at checking their email, for example. So having emails and postings in the museum spaces, the staff places in the museums, that would be a helpful way to make sure everyone is being informed about what's happening. And to go further, you can rethink about how your meetings are held so that you can have more equal footing. One of the suggestions was to have more circular groups, because even this circular setting breaks down these barriers of hierarchization. And in some cases, it might be helpful to bring in a moderator. That can be a tough one. Trying to go a little bit faster, I'm running behind. So for external communication, one of the questions was, what do we do when a polemic issue arises? What do we do when there's something kind of edgy that's happening in society? How do we respond to it? Well, historically, I think we know that museums have been silent largely at the beginning. They take a little while to respond to these issues, if they respond to them at all. And that's possibly because it's hard to react in moments of fear. It's hard to figure out what to say because there's so much stress about that situation. How do we align with our values and not say something that we're going to regret? And one of the ways to do this is to plan for it. Come up with strategies in advance to sit down and really think, okay, what do we do in these situations? What position are we going to take? How fast are we going to make that choice? And this can also be helpful if if your board of directors is a little slower to react on these things, because I don't know, you have 15 people who have to meet together first to talk about it before the museum can do anything on this issue. That's why it can be helpful to have this in advance, to help decrease this delay. Next one, what does it mean to not be neutral? Museums have long been presented as objective and universal in their approach. And they base their communication around a notion of neutrality, that it's this idea of being academic and scientific, that it's not it's this one person who's talking about it. It's the museum, and we are an academic and scientific institution, so it's neutral. This is a neutral position. But you can't be objective as a human being. It's impossible. We all have our own perspectives. And I think it's important that we put that forward. I think it's part of the discussion, the recommendations that this side be put forward. That everyone has their own unconscious biases. Even in an approach to a topic, your unconscious biases can limit how you see the topic at hand. And museum staff, researchers only present a limited perspective. And so the suggestion here is that museums talk about their collections as situated knowledge, as what we know right now. Who wrote about this? Who researched this topic? What are areas that might be interesting to further explore? As said, no person can be neutral or objective in their perspective. We all have blind spots in our cultural knowledge. The museum can and should update the information about their collections continuously, even when it's difficult information to share. People notice when you don't talk about where an object comes from, for example. Acknowledging and communicating about the museum's past, why and how it was founded, you can simultaneously valorize certain parts of your history and renounce other parts. Tell people that you have learned from these mistakes, that you're moving forward from it. Oh, no. So how do you react when you know that your intentions were good? This is a big one. Your intentions matter, but it's only part of the equation. If you do something that's well-intended and you still cause harm, you have still caused harm. And being defensive is one of the most common reactions to that. But museums are, above all, institutions made of people, and people will always make mistakes. And the advice here is to be humble, to recognize that you will make mistakes and you will have to own up to them, and that's a good thing. It's a part of the inclusion process. You have to try before you can make mistakes. Beware of pink washing, rainbow washing, diversity washing. These are terms meaning just because you put up a rainbow flag for Pride does not mean that you are an LGBTQAI plus friendly institution. And that's one that people do talk about a lot in these communities. Temporary exhibits on women artists are really important, and I'm very happy about that. But what is your museum doing to change its collection? Where is the permanent artwork being stored? Where is this going to change at a deeper level? And if you're doing that, communicate about it, because that's all it takes. It's like, okay, we know that this is one part of the process, and here's how we're working on the other side. Okay. So to conclude, I would like to thank the think tank and the museum staff for their interesting topics of discussion, their insights and recommendations. And as I mentioned, the process of becoming safer spaces is one that will require a lot of work and continual reanalysis. In revisiting our institutions and reimagining them to include traditionally overlooked people, we can rebuild stronger museums with a more complete knowledge base. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello. I have a question. You bring up what to do when people are not aware of a problem, right? And what is your advice when people are aware of the problem, but they keep denying there is a problem and they refuse to look at it?
That's a really great question. And that's why I think in this discussion about personnel that we need to really get HR involved in the discussion. Because if someone is continuing to aggress their colleagues, it's not acceptable workplace behavior, and there should be consequences to that. So for me, the issue here is you need to have a system in place to hold these people accountable. If they don't see that it's a problem, or if they do see it's a problem and they keep doing it, they should have to leave. If you have these values, you should live by them.
It's actually a follow-up question on the question that she asked, which I was going to ask as well, actually. But I mean, I understand what you say. HR should hold people accountable, but when it comes really from the top, like the top, there is no one higher. Yeah. It's really difficult because when you have someone who doesn't want to see the issues, but also states that, you know, based on what they call universalism thinking, like la pensée des Lumières, for example. And they say that there are no differences and we should be indifferent to differences. How do you react? I mean, I always react, but it doesn't change anything.
Yumina's really great at this. No. Yes.
Hi. I can relate to both the question and the follow-up one. And indeed, that was the first thing I had in mind. So what if the problem comes from the HR themselves? And then there is the question is for the individual suffering that needs to protect themselves, and it's not something that the individual can take. Because it's already kind of violent and hard to deal with it, and then you have to fight for it. That's too much to ask to individuals, honestly. So my opinion, and I hope, like, if a museum is really thinking seriously about putting in place a place that could be good for each and every individual, they have to recognize that each of the individuals have their own bias, and that might be, for me, a good idea to have someone like a small group of people within the museum that is not related to the top management and not related to HR. For example, because we are in Belgium, we have conseillers en prévention. I don't know the name in English. I feel that those people, for bigger institutions, of course, they have those type of people. They should be involved. Like, they should have training about those topics. They don't have it for the moment, which is for me kind of a problem. And they should really be like, that's a good starting point. I don't know how it works in other countries, but like to create like really like an awareness team or something like that, because indeed that's a big issue.
Yeah, that's exactly the advice I was going to give. It's really important to have safe spaces where you can talk about these issues. I think, so in these spaces, hopefully we can figure out creative solutions to how to address these issues. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not going to change. We have a limited possibility about what we can do to make change happen. I'm someone who will continually argue it. Someone tells me that they don't believe what I believe. I'm like, that's great. That means we get to debate all the time. I hope you're ready. And having this group of people I can go and talk to about my issues, about what I'm facing at work, with colleagues, without colleagues, both. I think that's also important as someone who has to live through this experience every day. Because I've had people tell me like, oh, okay, but I think feminists are pushing really hard. I think these anti-racist movements are pushing so much, and that, you know, it would be nice if we could just take a step back and like slow things down. And of course it was a straight white guy. And I was like, yeah, okay, I hear that it makes you uncomfortable, but I have to live as a woman every single day. I have to face these issues every single day. So if what is making you uncomfortable is the fact that I'm telling you that this is not acceptable behavior, instead of telling me to accept your bad behavior, look at yourself and change what's happening there. Do we have a last question? Yeah.
First, excuse my English, I'm not very fluent.
Si tu veux, tu peux le faire.
Ah, ok, super.
En français, ça va aussi.
Quand je parle avec souvent des directeurs de musées ou des membres actifs dans le monde muséal, ou même des gens du public, on a la réaction. Mais il ne faut pas qu'on aille trop loin dans l'autre sens. Je ne pense pas qu'il y ait une telle chose que trop d'inclusion, mais il y a encore, comme on a dit dans les autres questions, une conscience du problème, mais vraiment un pied sur le frein pour l'inclusion et pour plus d'équité. Comment on peut combattre cette...
Les personnes qui disent qu'il faut aller un peu plus loin, c'est ça?
Il ne faut pas aller trop loin.
Oh, pas aller trop loin. How do we talk to people who are telling us, okay, yeah, that's great, but don't go too far in what you're asking? You got it, yeah? Yes, please. Are you going to bring her one? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yamina is the president of our board of directors. She'll be doing one of the discussions later as well.
Okay, I will let you know how I deal with that. Personally, I have a legal back. Oh, je peux parler en français aussi, peut-être. Il y a des traductions aussi. Hein. Donc, je suis juriste de formation. Étant donné que mon job, je suis consultante en diversité, je suis inclusion advisor pour un des membres qui est Beaux-Arts. Donc, on est souvent, les personnes qui font le même métier que moi, on est souvent accusés même d'être des militants. Je ne sais pas ce que ça veut dire et je ne sais pas en quoi c'est mal, mais pas de problème. Ce qui n'est pas mon cas. Donc moi, je suis juriste de formation. Donc en fait, moi, je reviens toujours je recadre toujours avec les textes de loi. La loi, elle est simple. Hein. Elle dit, on ne peut pas discriminer quelqu'un sur base de tel critère. Donc je pars de ça. Je pars aussi, donc je reviens toujours sur ça, constamment. Je pars aussi de choses qui existent, donc il y a énormément de rapports qui existent sur ces questions-là. Quand une institution est frileuse, par exemple, de parler de la question des origines, parce que c'est ça, hein, c'est les origines, la religion, etc. Je dis, bon, en fait, c'est vrai qu'on ne peut pas dire de quelqu'un qu'il est de telle origine, etc., mais on perçoit ça. Je veux dire, vous me voyez ici, pour ceux qui me voient, qui sont présents. Et puis mon nom qui est passé, Yamina El Aklassi, donc c'est un nom à consonance arabe. On perçoit bien que je suis d'origine probablement nord-africaine, puisque nous sommes en Belgique et que cette communauté-là est importante. Et je dirais que vous avez raison, c'est le cas. Et directement, il y a des biais qui se mettent. C'est pas grave, c'est la vie. On est dans une société, ça se passe comme ça. Donc nier ce fait, même si ma nationalité dit que je suis belge, on peut pas nier ce fait, qu'on me perçoit comme ça. Je suis une femme aussi, en tout cas, je suis perçue comme telle. Donc on peut aussi parler de perception, en disant on ne veut pas dire que telle personne, qu'on me dit toujours on peut pas mettre des étiquettes chez les gens. Mais en fait, la réalité, c'est qu'on met des étiquettes chez les gens. On ne peut pas le faire officiellement, mais dans nos têtes, ça se passe. Donc de rappeler ça, d'où tout ce qui est formation en biais, tout ce qui est biais de stéréotypes, etc. Et il est vrai que la personne... Enfin, pour moi, personnellement, ce que je dis, c'est que tout le monde doit suivre des psychothérapies. Parce qu'on est tous... on se sent tous mal et coupables. Et en fait, il faut passer ça. Le problème, c'est que les gens restent sur la culpabilité. Et en fait, bon, tant que tu te sens coupable, on n'avance pas dans la question. Ça m'est égal comment tu te sens. Je voudrais qu'on avance et qu'on arrête de discriminer une personne. Donc, mais voilà. Mais moi, c'est la loi. Je commence toujours par le texte de loi. Ouais.
Merci Amina pour cette belle réponse. Super.